we can see this button that I'm talking about down here, include Kotlin support. So again, that's the default. It probably is already clicked. And if you're in the Kotlin course, make sure that is clicked. But if you're watching this video in the Java course, you need to untick that box. Leaving it ticked will cause Android Studio to generate Kotlin rather than Java code. Now, I mentioned that each time we create a new project, at least for the first few projects, so that you generate the correct code for the language you're using. Now, I'm going to untick the box, and that's because Java programmers don't need to know anything about Kotlin, but Kotlin programmers will need basic familiarity with Java. So whenever a video shows code in both courses, I'm going to show the Java code. Don't worry though, if we need to write any code at all, there'll be separate videos for each course. So in the Kotlin course, keep that box ticked, and you can compare the Kotlin code on your screen with the Java code that's going to appear online. So leave everything else on the screen. As I said, for this particular application, I'm doing something a little bit different, and I'm including, and I've unchecked the box. I'm going to click on next, leave everything else as it is, and on this next screen, we're going to leave everything else as it is as well. Now I'm going to be explaining these screens in the next video. With the Java code that's going to appear online. So leave everything else on the screen. As I said, for this particular application, I'm doing something a little bit different, and I'm including, and I've unchecked the box. I'm going to click on next, leave everything else as it is, and on this next screen, we're going to leave everything else as it is as well. Now I'm going to be explaining these screens in the next video, but for now I just want to focus on the templates. So I'm going to click on next. Now at the time I'm recording this, Android Studio ships with 13 templates. And the images on this selection screen try to give you an indication of what they contain. Now add no activity, this one here is the most basic, but I generally don't use that for most apps because we normally need at least one activity. Now I'm not going to go through describing all the templates because a lot of the explanation won't make much sense just yet anyway. And in fact, you may be wondering what this activity that I just mentioned is, but don't worry, I'll be explaining all that next. Now once you're comfortable with Android Studio and you've worked through a few of the apps in this course, by all means have a go at creating projects based on each of these templates to get a feel for what they provide. For now, the only ones we really need to use are the basic activity and the empty activity. So basic and empty. Now you can see from these images that basic activity contains a little bit more than the empty activity template. You can see the icon for the drop-down menu at the top right, and it also has a floating action button, this little yellow button at the bottom right. So if you're able to include a menu or floating action button or both, then you'd probably be best off starting with the basic activity template. But if you don't want either of those, then use the empty activity template instead. But what if you want a menu but not a floating action button? Well, in that case, you can either start with an empty activity and add the menu code, or, and this is probably easier, start with a basic activity and delete the code for the floating action button. So I'm going to start by choosing this empty activity over here so that we can see what that provides. Now on the next screen, as I click that, I'm going to leave everything as it is and accept the default values. So we'll see this activity name and layout name used in a minute, so just remember that they're called main activity and activity underscore main, and click on finish. Now Android Studio takes a little while to create the project, then you should end up with something that will look a little bit like this once this is finished. So I'll just fast forward this. Alright, so you should end up seeing something that looks a little bit similar to this. Now, the version of Android Studio that I'm using to record this video starts off in what's called Android View after creating a new project. You can see this Android tab up here in the top left-hand corner, and Android was the default mode that's been selected. Now, some people prefer to work in Project View, but it really doesn't matter which one you use. We can switch to Project View by clicking Project, and then we can expand this selection of folders and expand the details out of our application. Now, some of the other views won't show most of the files we need, so I won't be using them in this course. Now, the app that we've created is called My Application. It's actually called My Application 2, and that's because I already created one previously called My Application. And I expanded that view, and you saw there was this app folder. I can expand that, click that open, and this is where most of the files we're interested in are located. Now, in Android View, you switch back to that. The app folder is at the top level, this one here, I can expand that out, and this is why many people prefer to work in that view. More files are visible in Project View, but most of them are the ones that you don't generally need to worry about. The main files we have to change or create are in this Java or Res folders, or if you switch back to Project View, we can expand that out. We've still got the source, main, we've got the Java and Res folders here, just a little bit in a slightly different location when in Project View compared to Android View. That's the same set of files essentially just presented in a different way, so choose whichever view you're most comfortable with. I'll be mainly using the Android view in this course. Now over on the right hand pane up here, there's two files open, activity underscore main.xml and main.activity.java. Now these are the names of the activity and the layout from the earlier screen. Now if we close these, we can open them up by just opening the particular folder. In the case of the Java folder, we can double click main activity to open them up, and the activity underscore main, you can look at the layout folder and double click that and open it up like that. And again, going back to Android view, we can see essentially the same thing. Opening up, we can see that our main activity files there, and in the res folder, and the layout folder, there's our activity underscore main.xml. Now the activity underscore main.xml defines what the screen for the activity will look like, and if I go into this design tab, which is selected currently anyway, you can see that it looks very similar to the template image. There's no menu icon showing and no floating action button, just the text hello world as you can see there. Now main activity also doesn't contain very much, have a look at that. Don't worry about what any of this code means at the moment. I'm just showing you what the templates look like so you don't get stuck when Google changes them again in the future. And also don't worry that this is Java code if you're watching this in the Kotlin version of the course. Anything we do with the screen layouts is the same regardless of the language used, so some of the videos are the same for both courses. Now we can see that we've got a class here called main activity, and that's got a single method called onCreate. So class name, method name. Make a mental note of that, and then we'll see how the next template differs. So what I'm going to do now though is end the video, and in the next video we'll go ahead and we'll create a second project, this time based on the basic activity template. So I'll see you in the next video. I mentioned at the end of the last video that we were going to create another project. So I'm going to close this project. I'm going to go to the file menu and select the close project. And what we're going to do is create another project, this time based on that other template, the basic activity template. So I'm going to click on Start New Android Studio Project. So once again, I'm going to accept all the default values for everything and untick the Include Kotlin support box. But if you're using Kotlin, this time keep it ticked. We're going to click on that checkbox now so that you can see the difference. So click on Next. We're going to go to Next again. And then this time we're going to choose the basic activity. Once we've done that, we're going to click Next. So once we get here, we get to name the activity layout. But notice there's a couple of extra options compared to the last video when we used the empty activity. The title will be shown on the toolbar, and this template adds to the project. But to note that the activity name and layout name are the same as for the empty activity template. So we're going to click on Finish at this point. And once again, Android Studio should create a basic project based on the template we selected. Now, by the way, while it's building the project, it's not uncommon to see errors on the screen, but they should clear when everything's finished. Just keep an eye down here in the bottom right-hand corner on the status bar, and don't try to do anything with the project until it's finished. Just say something like Gradle build finished in, or words to that effect once it's finished, and how long it took when it's done. You can see that here at the moment it says Gradle build running. You can see down the bottom left-hand corner, Gradle build finished, and we're good to go. Now, by the way, you may also see a message at the top of the screen about Gradle files haven't changed. This happens from time to time with some Android Studio versions, so if you do see that, click the Sync Now button, link at the right-hand side as you can see on the screen there. When Android Studio is finished creating the project, you should see main activity and a layout called content_main.xml. We can see them both on the screen up here. Now, the layout looks very similar to our empty activity layout from the last video, but there's also a floating action button down here so we can see at the bottom right. Now, if you're feeling cheated because the image promised you a menu, don't worry, it's there, but it doesn't appear on this layout. Now, one difference between this template and the empty activity one is that Google splits the layouts for each activity up into two different files. Content_main.xml here is the one that we'll be using to put our own widgets into, things like buttons and text boxes and anything else that we want displayed on the screen. And the floating action button lives in another file called activity_main.xml. You notice over here we've got that file, so we'll double click that to open it. So you can see that the toolbar and the floating action button can be selected when I click on them. So I can click on something and notice that when I'm doing that, it's selected. But if I go back to content_main.xml, I can't click the floating action button. And that's because they don't exist in this file, although Android Studio does display the floating action button in the preview. Now, as I click on the toolbar and the floating action button back in activity_main, notice how they're selected over the far left of the screen over here in the component tree. And when I click on the main part of the screen here, it selects the include line, which is including the layout called content_main. And you can see that over here to the right-hand side. And this is called the attributes pane. So the idea is that the layout is split up to keep your widgets in a separate file from the toolbar and the floating action button. Now, if you wanted to, you could delete the include line and place all your widgets in here, but it's less confusing to keep them separate. Now, Google introduced this separation back in Android Studio 1.5, and that caused students at the time some confusion when they suddenly found two layout files in their projects. Now, it's possible that content_main may disappear from the template in a future version, but now that you know that content_main is just included in activity_main and that you don't have to keep your widgets separate if you don't want to, you shouldn't have any problems if things do change. And incidentally, in this version of Android Studio, the toolbar's blank even when previewing activity_main, and that does sometimes happen, but if I run the app, the toolbar would appear. So if you get a blank toolbar in preview mode, don't worry about it. It will show up when the app is run. Alright, now before I finish talking about templates, let's have a quick look at the main activity file. Now there's quite a bit more code in this version than in the empty activity template from the previous video, but it's all to do with the setting up of the floating action button and the toolbar. Now there's two methods or functions, if you were looking at this in the Kotlin course, that weren't present before, on create options menu and on options item selected. Now they're used to set up the menu and detect which menu items tapped. Also, there's code in on create to cause the toolbar to be drawn and to allow clicks on the floating action button to be detected. Now, if I don't want all that, I can just delete it. Now in the on create method, I'm going to go into there. I'm going to actually delete all but the first two lines. So everything from here down to the end of the right curly brace there, I'm going to delete, like so. And then I'm going to delete entirely the on create options menu function and also the on options items selected. So once I do that, we basically end up with the same code as the previous template would have given us. And by the way, I can also delete activity_main. I can come over here, right click, and select delete. I can go ahead and ignore those warnings. Click on delete anyway. And that's removed activity_main from this project. And then what I could do is rename content_main to activity_main. I can come over here and right click that, click on refactor, and select rename, and change that to activity. underscore main.xml and click on refactor. Now sometimes you might get an error doing that on a Mac or a Windows machine. And if that happens, just right click and choose copy. So if the rename didn't go through, just right click and select copy for the content underscore main XML file and select copy and paste and then choose activity underscore main as the file name, and then you'll be able to delete content underscore main. But in this case, you can see that the rename worked okay. So now that I've done that, notice over here there's this exclamation mark. And if you click on that to show it, we've got an error down here. We can scroll it up to have a bit of a look at it. And it's just basically a warning about the fact that the surrounding layout did not actually include this layout. Basically it's saying it's no longer shown inside another layout, but we don't need to worry about that at this stage. And what we can do instead is come over here to the text tab, and by clicking on that we can see the XML for the layout. Now you don't need to worry about this XML very often, although it's very helpful if you select it and paste it all into your question if you have a problem with a layout not working. What we can do to remove the error is delete the tools show in line very often, although it's very helpful if you select it and put it up to have a bit of a look at it. And it's just basically a warning about the fact that the surrounding layout did not actually include this layout. Basically it's saying it's no longer shown inside another layout, but we don't need to worry about that at this stage. And what we can do instead is come over here to the text tab, and by clicking on that we can see the XML for the layout. Now you don't need to worry about this XML very often, although it's very helpful if you select it and paste it all into your question if you have a problem with a layout not working. What we can do to remove the error is delete the tools show in line, this line up here, which is what Android Studio is essentially suggesting that we actually do. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, delete it, making sure that I leave the last greater than sign there. Put that back in like so. And if we go back and click on the design tab now, notice that the error is not highlighted anymore. We haven't got a red exclamation mark anymore. So we created a
भी समझाओ, ओके ठीक है।
A project using the basic activity template, but then we changed it to be exactly the same as the one created with the empty activity template. Now, I don't expect you to remember all of that, nor be able to do it yourself just yet, but by the time you finish the course, all of what we've done will make sense. So that's templates. They're just templates generating common code to save you having to type it, but there's nothing magical about them. You're completely free to make any change you want to once Android Studio has created the project from the template. Now, if Android Studio changes in the future and templates with these exact names are no longer available, you just want to choose ones that look similar. And you can always delete any code that doesn't appear in the videos or add any code that I have in the video, but which is missing from the template. Alright, so let's move on to the next video where we're going to start coding up our first app. See you in the next video. In this video, we're going to create our very first Android application. So if you haven't already started, start your Android Studio application. Now, if you're on a Mac, you can go into the Applications folder and double-click Android Studio. If you're on a Windows machine, you can go to the Start menu and type Android, then click the Android Studio icon when it appears. And on Linux, you can use the technique I showed you in that video to access the Android Studio desktop entry that we created. That's the installation video for Linux. So once you've started Android Studio, we're going to create our very first application. We're coming up here and clicking on Start a new Android Studio project. Now, once you do that, a series of screens will appear to ask you for some basic information about the project you want to create. Now, the first screen asks you for the application name. We're going to keep it simple and call our application Hello World. Now, the next part might be a bit confusing, company domain. Now, Android applications use the concept of a package name to make sure that your application reference is unique across the world. Now, that's a Java convention, but it is used for all sorts of other things as well. The internet couldn't function if domain names weren't unique worldwide. Now, the reason that it needs to be unique here is that when you eventually go to upload your code to the Google Play Android App Store to make it available for sale, you need to have a unique identifier that's not used by anyone else. So what Google suggests you do is use your company domain name. So in my case, I'm going to use my domain name. I've got a domain here, learnprogramming.academy. So just to show you what happens, I'm going to delete that. And notice I start typing learnprogramming.academy. The package name is being updated automatically. Now, Android Studio uses this reverse domain name to create the package. So you saw that I typed in learnprogramming.academy, and it came up and said academy.learnprogramming.helloworld. So the hello world was a representation of what I typed in the application name, minus spaces and all in lowercase. Now, if you haven't got your own domain name, that's okay. For training and testing purposes, there are a set of example domains that have been set aside for people to use. Example.com and example.org are two of these example domains. So you could just use example.org, and it'll produce the package name org.example.helloworld for you. Now, if you want more information, you can visit example.org or example.com in a browser, and there's a link for more information. You can literally have anything there, but just do note that once you've created your own applications and you're at the stage of uploading them to the App Store, then you will need to have a domain name so that you can make this unique. But as you can see, I'm going to leave mine now on screen and company domain as learnprogramming.academy. So next you need to define the location where you're going to start saving your projects. Now this is just like a word processing document in the sense that you need to choose somewhere to save them. So what I'm going to do is leave the default that I've currently got, which is in my case, I've got a subfolder there called Android Oreo Java where all my projects are going to be going. But if you wanted to choose a location, you can just come over here and click on the three little dots here, three little periods, and you can navigate to the folder where you want your files to appear. And if necessary, you can create a new folder to create a new folder. I'm going to leave that as the default. And if I had created a folder, I would have been able to click OK and a new folder would have been generated. So in your case, you want to do that and find the folder, the project location, where you want your files to go. And note that Android Studio will automatically append the name of our application to that. So in the case here, you can see that's my path. The Android Oreo Java is the folder, and Android Studio has added the slash and Hello World, which is the name of the project, to that path. And that's where it's going to save all the files for this project. So in other words, it's going to create a subfolder for this project and any other project you create. So as you create lots of projects as you move through this course, there will be one subfolder for each of those projects. Now, so that they're neatly separated and you're not running any risk of actually getting into difficulties in some way by overwriting code, make sure you don't try to put two projects into the same folder, because that can cause all sorts of problems. Alright, there's another important setting on the screen that we need to make. Make sure you untick the include Kotlin support box. You can see in my case it is already unticked. This causes Android Studio to generate Kotlin code if ticked rather than Java code. Now, because this is the Java version of our course, we definitely want that box unticked here. Now, by the way, it's possible to mix Kotlin and Java in the same project, but for our purposes we want Java to be the default, so make sure that that box is unticked before clicking next. Now, this next screen that pops up may well be a bit intimidating, certainly the first time you see it. You're probably thinking at this point, what's this all about? Well, firstly, before I start talking about minimum SDK, these things here, Where TV, Android Auto, and Android Things, you'd normally leave those unticked. So where is Android functionality to run Android applications on things like watches and so forth? In other words, wearable devices. TV is for Android TV so that you can create applications that work with Android TV, the TVs that are running the Android TV operating system. Android Auto is for cars, automobiles, literally. Again, it's a special version that runs on that so that you can create applications for cars. And last but by no means least, Android Things allows you to run Internet of Things devices, IoT devices. Now, we aren't going to be targeting any of those in this course because to actually do them justice, you actually need to create a course in their own right for each of them. So you'll be leaving those all disabled every time you create a project in this course. But the important thing, though, on this screen is this minimum SDK. It says up there, select the form factors of minimum SDK. So what's that all about? Well, SDK firstly stands for Software Development Kit, which is the version of the Android software of the Android operating system, the minimum version that your application is going to run on. Now, when we drop down this list over here, we can go all the way back to Android 4, codename Ice Cream. All the way down here, so you can see Android 4, that's API 14. Now, Google are no longer supporting older Android versions, so that's the earliest version we can choose here. Now, by monitoring the devices that connect to the Google Play Store, Google can keep track of which versions of Android are still being used out in the wild. So they've worked out that there aren't really many devices, if any, still running versions of Android prior to API 14. Now that's great if you want to fully support everything, but by adding support for all versions of the Android operating system going right back to version 4, we are limited to some of the functionality that we can use. Because as new versions of the Android operating system have come out, Google have updated it and improved it and frankly added a lot of features. So consequently, it's not recommended to go back and say that you're going to support that minimum version. So it ends up being a bit of a trade-off between the percentage of people who can access an older version and the functionality that you want to have in your applications. So as a general rule, I suggest that you set your minimum version to target Android 4.2 Jelly Bean, and that's this one here, API 17. And when you select each version, there's display updates to show the percentage of devices that your app will work with. You can see here that API 17 and higher will include 96% of the devices that are active in the Google Play Store. Now that number will increase as older versions are updated or replaced, but at the time of recording, this 96% of all Android devices active today are using Android Studio 4.2, codename Jelly Bean, or later. So there's a reason I suggested API 17, and that's because support for right-to-left languages was included in that version. Now you could well target an earlier API, and if you've say got an API 16 phone that you want to use, for example, then you could choose API 16 instead. But I'm comfortable saying that you should choose API 17. But I'll also be showing you how to change that if you change your mind and decide to support an earlier version. And we'll see how to do that in a later video. But by choosing API 17 here, anyone who's running an Android version going back to Android API 17 or higher will be able to run the application that you create, which is 96% of users who are currently connecting to the Google Play Android App Store at some point. Now, if they're running an older version, they won't be able to download and run your application. Incidentally, its ability to set a minimum SDK is why you didn't have to install all those older Android versions when we were configuring Android in the SDK manager earlier in the course. And I'll talk a bit more about compatibility later, but you can see that the older SDK levels are available even though you didn't install all the previous versions. So we click on Next, and we get to the template screen that I discussed in the previous video. Now, these are the various types of projects that you create by default with Android Studio, and as I mentioned, it'll automatically add code and layouts for you, depending on which one you choose. Now, once again, if the exact template isn't available because Google perhaps changed things by the time you're watching this video, don't worry. I'm going to use empty activity here, which is selected by default. So just choose if there is a different choice for you, the one that's closest in appearance. If empty activity isn't available, the name has changed. Once we've done that, we're going to click on Next. So finally, just before Android Studio creates the project and generates the code for us, it's asking us for the name of the activity and the layout. Now, I'm going to be talking about activities and layouts a bit later. For now, we can just accept the default names that Android Studio is suggesting. Now, we've already seen how both of these names are used in the previous video. The suggested names are fine and quite descriptive, so I'm going to stick with them for now. Now, there's also a couple of checkboxes here, and normally you leave both of them checked. Now, the first one, generate layout file, that causes Android Studio to create a default layout file for the project, the activity_main layout. Now, most apps will need at least one layout, or they wouldn't be able to display anything, so you may as well get Android Studio to create this file for you. But if you're creating an app that runs a service and had no user interface, then you could untick that box if you wanted to. Now, it's also a good idea to keep the backwards compatibility checkbox ticked, because if you untick it, you only run on the latest version of Android. Now, that's not strictly true. You can change the specific version, but you will be targeting a single version of Android, and the app won't work on early versions. Now, don't worry, we're going to be talking in detail about app compat later. For now, just make sure to leave that box also ticked and click on Finish. Now, Android Studio will then take that information that we've entered there, and it's now creating a base Android project. Now, the very first time you do this, it can take quite a while to start while Android Studio builds everything, and it maybe has to download some code from the internet as well and check everything, and that can take some time initially. You'll see a progress dialog to start with, and then Android Studio appears. In my case on screen, you can see that the project has been completed and set up. So basically, just keep an eye on the status line at the bottom of the screen. Eventually, you'll end up with the project finished with a message at the bottom left-hand corner, gradle build finished in, and how long it took to actually build the project. Now, that time's only for the final build step, so it might be shorter than you actually have to wait. The next time you open the project, though, it should be a lot quicker, though. And just as a general bit of advice, don't try to do too much until it's finished building the project. Expanding the directories in the project pane is okay, but editing code or changing layouts isn't a good idea until you see that build finished message. Alright, so you can see in my case it's finished now, and you may have got some things that have come up on the screen. Firstly, sometimes you'll see a message that Gradle files have changed. If you do see a screen like this, just click on the Sync Now button at the top right-hand corner of the screen. That should clear the message and Gradle will build the project again. Now, if you're wondering what Gradle is, it's an open source build automation system. So its purpose is to together all the bits of the project to create the application file that can be installed on an Android device. And if you use external libraries, such as the YouTube API, that we'll be using in a later video in this course, then you tell Gradle about them and it sorts everything out for you. You don't need to know more than that at this stage, though, because Android Studio runs Gradle for you when you come to run the app. The other thing that may pop up, which hasn't for me because I've disabled it, is tip of the day. So you might see this little screen popping up. Now, that shows interesting things or interesting features in Android Studio that can make you more productive. But until you've used Android Studio a bit, it probably won't make a lot of sense. So what I suggest you do in that initially, until you've got more experience with Android Studio, is to simply close it. Again, the tips can help you become more productive once they start making sense. And if you want, which I've done, is you can come down here and uncheck this Show Tips on Startup box so that it doesn't pop up every time you start Android Studio. And I'm going to leave it like that so it doesn't pop up. But again, if you want to access that in the future, it's in the Help menu and the Tip of the Day. Right, so at this point our project's been created. Let's finish the video here, and we'll start talking more about this project in the next one. Okay, so our project has now been created. Now, different versions of Android Studio start up showing a different file. Now, I've got the main activity Java file open, and you can see activity_main up here, next to it on the tab at the top. Now, sometimes activity_main will be the one initially displayed, but it doesn't really matter because you can just click on the tab to switch between them, like so anyway. Now, if you remember, these are the names that we gave to the files in the last screen in the previous video, or rather the names that Android Studio suggested and that we accepted. Now, there's a lot of things to talk about on the screen, but looking at it, you might be thinking, wow, where do I start with all of this? But the thing to keep in mind with a lot of this is, there's a lot of information on the screen, but you don't need to understand a lot of it straight away. Now, as we go through the course, for example, you'll understand what layouts are and widgets and so forth. Now, we'll cover that in a later video, but just keep in the back of your mind that Android Studio application is extremely powerful and does enable you to create very complex applications. You don't need to know a lot about those advanced things yet, and in fact, we're not going to be using some of those until later in the course, but I will be explaining things as I go along. So if you keep in mind that you can't understand everything at once, then it will make a lot of sense eventually. Going through some of the fundamental things, I'm going to show you how to make a few little changes before the next video where we run this particular application. Now, the first thing I'd like to mention is the rendering error that you can get if you've installed a preview version of the Android SDK. So it's generally not a good idea to install preview versions while you're learning, because you can't always be sure if the error is a result of your code or a bug in the SDK. So firstly, here's a screenshot showing an error displaying the activity_main layout using the Android N preview version before the Android N official version was actually released. Now, Now this doesn't look good, and if that's the first thing you see when starting Android Studio, then it may well be a bit scary and off-putting. Now there are bugs in preview versions because if there were no bugs, they'd release it and there wouldn't be a preview version anymore. But with that said, seeing things like that when you're all new to this can be scary. And actually, if you stop and think about it, it's obvious that the problem isn't something that you've done because you haven't entered any code yet, so the bug can't be yours. That doesn't really help though because you still don't know what to do about it. So it's a general rule, avoid preview versions until you've had a lot of experience and become confident in sorting out problems. Now it's possible that you might get a rendering error even if you're not using preview version. That does happen from time to time, and the screenshot shows the particular error I'm thinking of. If you get something like that, the fix is to go to the File menu and choose the option to invalidate caches/restart. Alright, so back in Android Studio, if you did see an error like that, immediately after creating a new project or even after opening one that was previously working, you just come up to File and select this Invalidate Caches Restart option, and that should fix the problem for you. Now, the good news is that errors like that seem to be less common in Android Studio 3. However, Google changes things all the time, and they do sometimes introduce new bugs. Okay, so let's have a look at what some of these other things are. So I'm going to start with the layout. Now, you can see at the top there's a few buttons. The first one I want to draw your attention to is a button that lets you choose which version of Android is used for the display. So it's a button that's above the images when you're editing layout files. In other words, you need to have a layout file open, activity_main in this case. And what I'm going to do is come over here and click on this project pane, things a bit more space, closing that down. And you can see over here that the one I'm talking about, it's got a picture of Android and a number. In this case, it's got the number 27 or O, and that tells us that we're running API 27, running Android 8. So that may well be the only option you have, and that's great because you really don't need to have an earlier version, as I mentioned. But I've actually got API 24, 26, and 27 on my computer, and I can switch between those versions if I wanted to. But generally, I recommend you only need to specify the latest release version and only have that version on your computer. Now, in case it's not obvious, you do need to install the SDK for any version that you want to use for the preview. Now, the other thing is, you may recall when we set up the wizard, it asks for names, and we left the layout name activity_main. Now, layout is a file that specifies how the various parts of the screen are laid out. Android Studio lets you modify the layout, either by using this graphic designer or by modifying the XML that represents all the objects on the screen. I think of a layout as a screen definition, and by changing the layout, you define what the screen looks like and what it contains. Over to the left here are all the widgets that we can add to the screen. So you can see text widgets, various buttons, and other things like progress bars and spinners. And so scroll down, you can see all these different things. Quite a lot of widgets you can add. Text fields we're going to import, various containers and image widgets, a whole host of things you can use when creating the screens for your apps. And you can make a lot of changes in the design view by dragging widgets onto the layout. So for example, I can go back up to the top. So I can drag a button and drop it onto the layout, for example. Now we're going to be doing that soon, so I'm just going to delete that for now. You can also edit the XML, which is the format that the file is stored in. So I come down here and click on the text tab. You can see the XML representation of our layout. Now with Android Studio 2.2, Google set out to make it possible to create even complicated layouts without ever having to modify the XML, and they've almost succeeded. There's still at least one reason that you'll have to edit this XML, unless you want to scrap the entire layout and start again, but on the whole, you don't have to edit the XML to get things done. Now it can be a quicker way to create multiple similar widgets, such as an array of buttons for a calculator app, for example, but you can achieve just about everything without having to know XML. Now if you already are familiar with XML, then what you're seeing should look fairly straightforward. We can see that the basic screen type is a constraint layout, with attributes setting things like its width and height. And included in the constraint layout is a text view with its text set to hello world. Now this can look a bit complicated if you haven't seen XML before, so I'm going to come over here and click on the design tab to switch back. And you can see over here we've got something called the component tree to the left. And that pretty much echoes what we saw in the XML view. At the top is our activity_main constraint layout. Contained within the constraint layout is our text view. And when I click on that text view over here on the screen, you can see it gets highlighted for us automatically to the left in the component tree. And that works the other way too. So if I click on something in the component tree, it also gets selected on the screen in both the design and blueprint parts of the previous screen. There's also a load of attributes for the thing that we selected over to the far right. So I've got the text view selected over there. You come over here, you can see we've got the text property over here set to hello world. I can change it here. If I start typing I was here, for example. Once I press enter, you can see the changes are reflected on the screen. When I press enter, the text view automatically expands as I type more text as well. So I'll come back here, and there's a space on the end. Type in today, press enter, you can see it's expanded to fit the extra text. Basically, you sort of got wider on the blueprint and the full text appears on both the design and the blueprint previous screens. Now, there are other ways of changing that, including using the strings.xml file in the res values folder. That's probably outside of the scope of this first video. So what I have done is shown you a way to update the text, and we'll be doing that, but there are other ways that make it easier to make your app available in other languages. Now, you probably wouldn't change it on a real application by just overcopying like I did, but we'll be covering that later in the course. But that way we'll get us going for now. Now, what you're seeing is only a sample selection of properties, the ones that you probably want to change most often. You can get access to all the properties by coming up here and by clicking up these two arrows up here. Now this version of Android Studio defaults to showing the XML attributes editor when you first run it. So what we've got here are the attributes that you've currently defined, or that have been defined for us by the template. Now in previous versions of Android Studio, all the attributes appeared in an alphabetical list. Now this makes life much easier because you can scroll through and check out any attributes that sound interesting. With the release of Android Studio 3, however, that I'm using, that list doesn't appear straight away. Instead, we've got the attributes that we changed, even if we changed them without being aware of it in the template. You can see things like the layout width and the layout height showing on the screen. There's also a text attribute, and also the constraints which you may not have been aware that you changed. So really what this is a concise view of the attributes being used at the moment. So if you know what attribute you want to change, it's also very easy to set it in here. You just type in the blank row to make it happen. This concise view is great when you know what you want to change, but it isn't very helpful when you're learning about all this. Fortunately, Google have also made the complete list available. To do that, all you need to do is click on this cog drop down up here and select all attributes table. And that changes to the same view that earlier versions of Android Studio had. We can now scroll down through the list. So in other words, you can choose which view to use here. As you get more experienced, you may want to use the XML attribute editor layout that we had before, and you can access that again by just clicking on the cog like we did. There's all sorts of things you can change here. I'm going to go back and select all attributes table again. So basically this way, there's all sorts of things you can change here. The one interesting set are the constraints. You can see this at the top there. I click on this little arrow, that'll expand the list of options. And you can see there's quite a lot of them. And you can make that pane wider, by the way, by dragging its edge. So you want to see what the names are, that moves everything over, if you can't see the full names. But if you're short of screen space, you can switch off the design or blueprint images using the select design surface button just above them. So I can come up to here if I wanted to, and choose just design, or choose just blueprint. And you can scroll this over a little bit more, depending on the amount of screen real estate you have. I'm going to come back and choose both of them. And in general, each pane in Android Studio has a button that can be used to shrink it out of the way so that you can use the full space on your screen to focus on what you're doing. Now at the moment we're designing a layout, we don't need to see all the files in the project. You'll notice that each separate pane has a button that looks like a bar. So I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to bring back the project pane by clicking on this tab again. It's this little button over here that I'm talking about. So clicking this button will shrink the pane in the direction of the arrow. You can see if you look at that carefully, the arrow is pointing to the left. The idea of that is to give you an indication of where to look to get it back. So you can see the button, that will get the pane back just by looking in the direction of the arrow. So for this project pane, the arrow points left. Over to the left, you can see it's got one column project appearing to the left. So if I click on that now to close it, I can click on one project to open it again. So you can do the same thing with the panes that open up on the bottom of Android Studio. For example, I can open up the logcat window. And come over here, you can see that we've got a downwards pointing arrow this time. And incidentally, don't worry about what logcat is at the moment. This is about controlling the individual panes, and you'll be seeing what they will do later. So at the far right is the button to shrink this pane with the arrow pointing downwards to show which way it will shrink, so we know how to get it back again. So I can close it down again. And if I open it up again, it'll come over here and click on the event log. They both appear next to each other. And again, I can just use the buttons to shrink them. So there's a lot going on in Android Studio, and it can look very confusing, but you control which panes you see, and you can shrink any that you're not interested in. Really, that lets you just focus on the work you want to do. So I'll close down those two bottom panes. I'm also going to shrink down the project pane again, so that we can focus on our layout. Now, I was looking at the constraints before I started opening and closing panes. The constraints do look a little bit confusing, but these long names are intended to describe what each one does. So for example, the first one's bottom to bottom of, up here, which tells you that we line the bottom of our text view up with the bottom of something else, which is what this first constraint does, but you can also line the bottom of it up with the top of something, so there's a bottom to top of up here, which we can also use about halfway down. And that would align the bottom of the text view with the top of another object on the screen. You can also line the left or right of a widget with the left or right of another widget to position things where you need them. So lining everything up in here will soon get tedious, and there's fortunately a much easier way that I'm going to show you shortly when we've got a few more controls on the screen. Now you want to come in here to check and maybe change a few things though, especially on a slow computer or if you've only got a small screen. So don't worry about what these constraints mean, you don't have to remember them all. Once you've lined up a few things, it'll make a lot more sense. And we'll be coming back to this, and we'll be using this layout view a lot throughout the course, so you'll get plenty of practice. But now I just wanted to quickly show you where you go to make changes to the layout for the apps. So I'm going to click on this double arrow now, go back to the common properties, and also to get some screen real estate back. I can also move this over again if I want to make them a little bit bigger. Okay, over to the left of these buttons, over here, is the one that you can toggle the layout into landscape, which is great for checking how things will look when the device is rotated. I can come over here and click on switch to landscape. And again, we'll be coming back to this layout editor in the next video. The other thing that I wanted to show you now is the project pane. This is where you can choose which files you want to work on. So I'm going to just go back to landscape mode again. I'm going to bring back this project pane. So I can come over here and expand out, and expand Java. And finally, our package name, academy.learnprogramming.helloworld. We'll do that, expand that. You can see our Java files. Now under res, there's a layout folder. Click on that. And that's where our layout's stored. So in here are all the files that are associated with the project. And again, that'll make more sense as we go through the course, but the clever thing is that Android Studio has created all of this for us, saving a lot of time. Now the Java file main activity has the code that Android Studio generated for us. I went through this briefly in the video on templates. There's not much in this one that's... So we open it. That's because we chose the empty activity template. But you will see this line that uses the activity underscore main layout. So that's one way that the layout files are used to create the display for our apps. So Android Studio has created the basic code for our app with a layout to define the screen and the code to display it when we run the app. So that's part of the beauty of Android Studio. It does a lot of this work for us, saving us a lot of time when we're creating our applications. So that was a really quick tour of Android Studio. We'll be looking at it in much greater detail as we go through this course. Before you can do much experimenting though, you need to be able to run your app to see how the things you're trying out really behave. So in the next video, we're going to run this test, or run this app rather, using the emulator that we installed in a previous video. And then in the video after that one, we're going to show you how that runs on a physical Android device. So I'll see you in the next video. In the previous video, we set up our Hello World application. And what I want to do now is take you to the next video. Later. So I can web update here now, as you can see. I'm going to go ahead and buying loads of Android phones and tablets. Right, you can see it says disconnected, so I'm going to start that again. I'm going to come down here straight away, give it a second to start. And select no filters, I'll show you what it looks like on that and how to... In the previous video, you saw how to run the Hello World app on an emulator. In this video, I'm going to connect a real Android device, my own Android Nexus 5X phone, and run our app on that. Now, if you're using Windows, it is important that you install the Google USB driver when we configured Android Studio using the SDK Manager in the earlier video in section 2. And in addition, depending on the model of phone, you may need to download and install a specific driver for your phone. That's only if you're running on Windows. Now, on a Mac or Linux machine, however, you can just plug the device in and it'll work, so that's a bit easier, and I'm going to be doing this on my Mac. So I'm going to assume that in the case of Windows, you've got the necessary drivers installed, and you can connect your phone to your computer using a USB cable to transfer files. Now, if you have any problems doing that, then you do need to resolve them before continuing with this video. Samsung phones on Windows, for example, need KISS installed on Windows. We'll certainly do that at the time I'm recording this video. So do check if you're running on Windows if there's specific software drivers needed for your Android device to communicate with Windows. Alright, so that said, the first thing to check before using your phone to run your apps on is to make sure that you can transfer files from the phone or tablet. And if you can't do that, then anything else we try to do isn't going to work. Now, some phones come with USB cables that are for charging only. They don't allow data transfer, and if you get problems copying photos, for example, from your phone to your computer, then do try a different cable. We have seen problems in the past that can be resolved with a new cable, so certainly, if you're having issues, do try using a separate cable. Now, if you've got normal file transfer working, let's get started running apps on a real device. Now, I've got some software that I'm about to start on my phone that lets me record the phone screen so that I can show you what's happening on my phone as well as what's happening in Android Studio. So I'm going to switch over to the phone now, start the recording, and allow you to see what's actually going on my phone. Alright, so now you can see that my Nexus 5X screen is showing, and what we're going to do is enable the developer options on this phone. Now, developer options aren't in any of the normal settings menus, instead they're actually hidden until you enable them, and in my case, we go into settings to actually do that. So I'm going to come down here, go to my settings, and this may be slightly different depending on the phone that you're running, but in the case of the Google Nexus 5X, I scroll down to the bottom. Okay, so once I'm on this settings menu, I'm going to click on System in my case. So it'll be something along the lines of Settings About Phone. You need to get to the menu that has the About Phone option. So I'm going to click on System in my case. You can see down the bottom here, I've got About Phone. And what I can do there now is I can actually click on that, and that brings us to this About Phone option. Now, just before I scroll down to the bottom under this build number, do note that this option here hasn't got a developer's menu option at the moment. So what that means is it's not enabled. So in the case of my phone, this is where that menu will appear. So I'll go to About Phone, and you'll need to find that for your device. So you get down here and scroll down to the bottom, we've got this build number, as you can see here. So what we need to do is actually tap that 7 times. When you do that, you get a message that developer options have been enabled. And it's not very intuitive, but that's deliberate. So it prevents people from turning developer options on without knowing what they are or what they're for. And in the case of using an Android device for testing, we need to have that developer's option. So I'm going to tap this build number 7 times. You'll notice that we've got a menu, a little toast message popping up there now. And I've finally got this message here. And because I'm using a Google Nexus 5X, I've got a pattern that I can specify to unlock this phone. But if you didn't have a pattern, you might have a pin or some other mechanism to unlock the phone at this point. So I'm just going to unlock this and continue. And now you can see that it says down the bottom, you're now a developer. So basically tapping the build number 7 times turns on the developer options and lets you use the phone for development purposes, which we want to do in this course. So you now have a new menu on your phone. It should either be this menu here, or if we go back one, you can see now that we've got this menu developer option showing on the screen now, which wasn't there before. So your first challenge in this course is, if you're not running a Google Nexus 5X, is to find that menu on your phone. So in my case, you can see there, so I'm going to click on developer options. Now, there's a host of options in the developer options menu, but we're really interested in 2 of them at this stage, and only one is really important. Now, the first one is stay awake. You can see that on the screen there. Now, this prevents the phone from locking while it's charging, so you won't have to keep unlocking it while testing your app. It saves a bit of time and annoyance, but if you don't have that option, then don't worry. But if you do have it, then it might be a good idea to tick it, and that's if you have something like a password or pattern, as in my case, to unlock your phone. So I'm going to select that anyway, to leave it on, so that we'll never stay on charging, so that it saves a bit of time during our testing. But the important setting is USB debugging. So I need to scroll down a little bit to see that. And there's USB debugging, the debugging menu there. Now, without this one set, you won't be able to test apps on your device on Android Studio. So you need to make sure you turn on USB debugging, so I'm going to do that. You can see we've got this pop-up, and you'll probably get a similar message on your phone that's asking us to confirm that we want to allow USB debugging. In this case, that's fine, because we are using it for development purposes. I'm going to click on OK. So once that's done, you want to plug one end of the USB cable into the phone and the other into the computer. So I'm going to stay on my phone display and select that now and plug my device in. But just before that, what I'm going to do is switch back to Android Studio, and I want to bring up the screen where we normally start our apps. So I'm going to come back to there now. I'm going to click on the Run menu. You can see here on the list of connected devices, at the moment there's nothing. There's only the virtual device that we previously configured that we ran our app in the last video. There's nothing under connected devices. I'm going to come back to that shortly, but for now, we'll go back to the screen on my phone again. I'm going to plug in the cable. And I've now got this message appearing on my phone that says allow USB debugging, and it's giving me the message about the computer's RSA key fingerprint, which I have to obscure for security reasons, but it's just basically a large number, and it's asking us whether we want to allow that. If I switch back over to Android Studio quickly, you can see at the moment under connected devices, there's a code there that says offline at the moment. So what I'm going to do now, I'll switch back to my phone's display, is I'm going to click on always allow from this computer, because this is going to be my main test computer. I'm going to click on OK, and once we do that, we'll switch back over to Android Studio. Click on OK there. And now if we switch back to Android Studio, you can see under connected devices, it's LG Nexus 5X, and that'll be your phone's model, and it tells you also the API that it's running. In my case, I'm running Android 8 on this phone, API 26. So I've now got a device that we can actually test on. So basically what we've done is we've set up the phone and allowed it, or given it access so that we can use it to run applications to test. And again, with the deployment target on, you can see that we've got this Nexus 5X available as an option now, which wasn't there before. And we've still got our available virtual device, which is for running the emulator. But we've now got a real device as well, which we're going to use to run now. So you can use the same mechanism as I've used before. You can just come up here and select Run, and choose either the connected device, and just if I unplug the USB cable now, which I'm doing now, you can see that then disappears. Connected device is none. If I plug it back in again, give it a moment, you can see that it actually comes back again. So once we've done that one-time configuration, you'll be able to access this without going into any menus or setting anything else up. And keep in mind that if you're running on Windows, you should probably also disconnect the device properly from the taskbar, as you would like a USB memory stick or something along those lines. But obviously, in my case, on a Mac, I haven't done anything to the phone storage. I haven't written any data to the phone, so it was okay just to unplug it. Now, if your phone doesn't appear, or you can see that you can't see its full name or the serial number, that probably means that you haven't ticked the USB debugging in the developers options that I showed you earlier in this video, or that you haven't allowed access from your computer. In my case, so let's actually try running this. I'm going to click on OK to start it running, and I'm going to switch back to my Google Nexus 5X phone and check that it works. Clicking on OK, and I'll go back to the phone now. And you can see there on my phone that the app was launched automatically, and we've got the Hello World application now running on my Google Nexus 5X. Now, by the way, you don't need to be running Oreo API 26 on your phone. As long as your phone is running API 17 or higher, then the app should work. But if your phone isn't running at least the minimum SDK that we set, you'll get a message when you select device and click OK. And in fact, looking at the slide here, you'll see that there was actually an indication of this in the phone's description before clicking OK. So again, your phone needs to be running the minimum SDK that we set, which was API 17 when we configured this project. Now, if that's the only physical device you've got, you can change the minimum SDK. You can go to File, Project Structure, File, Project Structure. And click on App down here. And you can see we've got on the Flavors tab, come over here to Flavors. We've got minimum SDK version, and you can change that to match the version of Android running on your phone. We can select that. But actually, it doesn't really matter what's available as a drop-down, because what you can actually do is you can just type the API number that you want to set into the box. So for example, if you're using an API 16 device, you'll change the 17 to 16 just by typing it, click OK, and the project updates. You see down the bottom Gradle's working away. And from that point, when you go to run it again after it finished updating, you'll be able to run that on your phone, assuming in this particular case, it was an API 16 device. In the case of what we did, I'm just going to go back and make that change again, go back into project structure. App, click on Flavors. I'm going to set it back to what it was, which was in my case, 17 being the minimum version that we defined at the start of this project. So this example, as long as your phone's running API 17 or higher, it should work fine. If not, you just need to change the minimum SDK level, as you saw me do there. But with 96% of devices now running API 17 or higher, it should be fine in most cases. So that's it. That's how to run an app on your phone rather than using an emulator. So it's running fine as you saw. And I'll go back now briefly to the phone now. Now if I actually rotate this into landscape, so I'll move the phone, you can see the app successfully changes to landscape automatically. So that's it, how to run an app on your physical device. So as long as you enable developer options by tapping 7 times, as you saw me do, you can turn USB debugging on whenever you want to use your phone to test your apps. And you may want to switch off USB debugging when you're done, just remember to turn it on again when you come back to developing mode. But there's nothing wrong with leaving USB debugging on if that's something you want to do when you're testing on a regular basis. All right, so that's the end of this section. In the next section, we're going to start creating proper applications, and I'm going to explain some of the concepts like main activity and layouts and so forth in more detail. We haven't done any programming yet, but we've now got the development environment set up, and we can now run apps using emulators and physical devices. So we're ready to start.
Did you know there's a lot of factors and things that you'll need to overcome